We don't know. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's community committee meeting here at the Sapling Room. Thank you all for turning up. Just before we start, I'd like to remind everyone, members and officers in physical attendance, if you've got an electronic device, please mute them to avoid any feedback. Any remote participants to keep their camera and microphone off unless they wish to speak, and ideally not to use the camera facility, as this can affect the quality of the meeting. This meeting will be recorded, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swale Borough Council or KCC laptop to participate virtually. If you join using the link on the website or on a mobile or tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you, and you may not be recorded as in remote attendance. So if you do speak, do make sure that you know who you are, so we can make sure that we note that you have attended. If I could ask all members to speak clearly and loudly, we're using the OWL system there. So if you speak a little bit too quietly, then we may have to ask you to come to the front to speak closer to the mic, so that members or people accessing the meeting remotely can hear what's being said. So it may be necessary to stand closer to the OWL system in order that remote participants can hear you. As I say, welcome to the community meeting, and I'd like to include any visiting members who are online who are attending remotely. The following people will be in attendance either remotely or physically: the Chief Executive, Larissa Reid, remotely. The Director of Regeneration, is on holiday. I don't see her on the line. She might have attended remotely, but she's away on holiday, and she's being represented by the Head of Housing and Community Services this evening, on my right, Charlotte Hudson. And we also have in physical attendance the Community Services Manager, Steph Curtis, and Democratic Services. In physical attendance is Joe Millard, and remotely is Kelly McKenzie. Don't think I've missed anyone. Just to advise that we don't have any fire drill planned at the moment. So if the fire alarm does sound, those in attendance should leave via the exits indicated to the left, and there's some over there at the rear. So you've got exits over there, exits through there. That's probably the nearest and quickest way to get out. And we will move to the fire assembly point, where we will make sure that you're all out and safe. And obviously, if it's a dummy run, we can then reconvene the meeting. If not, we'll have to decide what happens once the fire brigades arrive. Can I just ask if there's any apologies for the meeting this evening?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Councillor Hannah Perkin, Councillor Mike Henderson, substituted opinion. Councillor Pete Neal's online and remote attendance, but I believe that Councillor Mike be substituted this evening.
Nick Hampshire.
Beg your pardon. Nick Hampshire.
If I just ask if there is any declarations of interest on anything on the agenda this evening. Sorry, Councillor Davey.
The cost of living up there will be applicable by the trustee diversity house. The trustee diversity house, would that be applicable?
I think you should mention it,
Yeah.
because they will be part of the cost of living.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
And a failure to mention it would be worth mentioning if it's not relevant. Thank you. We've got the minutes there from the meeting on the 7th of September. I take it you've all had the opportunity to read the minutes. Is everyone quite happy these minutes are a true reflection of the meeting that was held that evening?
Agreed.
Cool. don't think there's anything from the minutes, any actions or anything. So the first item on the agenda is item 5, the domestic abuse policy. And I'd like to ask the officer, Stephanie Curtis, to introduce the report, please. Thank you.
I guess in terms of this domestic abuse policy, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the domestic abuse work that the council has already had in place for a number of years. Through both our safeguarding and through our community safety functions, we have looked at what we could do to support domestic abuse victims in the borough for quite a long time. 2021 saw the introduction of the Domestic Abuse Act, which placed a number of additional duties on both upper tier and lower tier authorities. We were able to have some funding from the government to be able to have a domestic abuse officer in post to review what we're doing and to ensure that some additional actions can be put in place. Through the Community Safety Partnership, which the council is an active partner, there are a large number of priorities that we look at, but domestic abuse has been one for at least the last 10 to 12 years. And through that work and through the work as a council, we work very closely with support service providers within the borough to ensure that there is an effective response in place for victims and survivors of domestic abuse. Due to the fact that the Domestic Abuse Act has come into place and because of our close working with the Cape Medway Domestic Abuse Partnership, council agreed to apply for the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance accreditation earlier this year. The accreditation standards are in place to try and increase the quality of service that we provide to victims and to their families. And one of the key things within that accreditation is to have a standalone domestic abuse policy. So that is where this policy has come from, although we've already been doing an awful lot of work under sort of a number of different umbrella sort of areas. We wanted to have a standalone policy to bring all of that together and to ensure that we can get the accreditation that we're working towards. So this policy covers our legal duties as a council, our roles and responsibilities, training for staff, partnership working, publicity and awareness raising, and how we'll physically respond to domestic abuse. We are also drawing together a separate domestic abuse policy that will underpin domestic abuse procedures that will underpin this policy. So the proposal that I'm bringing to you today is for the Communities Committee to agree for this draft domestic abuse policy to go out to public consultation for a period of 8 weeks. Within that consultation, we'd be looking to speak to our local domestic abuse agencies, other key partners such as temp police and housing associations, but particularly local residents, the victims and survivors of domestic abuse that may have been involved in our services in the past. Hopefully that's enough in terms of introduction.
Councillor Dendell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a question. I've been through this quite carefully. What I can't see really is how children don't come through or be referred without the parents, in other words, in their own right.
Yeah.
It does say in one paragraph there, but I don't think it's clear as to what they will do.
So effectively, the procedures that we will have separately will detail exactly what we would do. Generally, I suppose a lot of our council services are adult facing rather than the children, but certainly if children are identified as particularly part of the family or household, maybe that present to housing, we would ensure that whether or not it's a social care referral or mental health referral or other support services, we've got a directory of sort of services in place that we could make appropriate referrals onto. Additionally, within the community, part of our partnership role is working with other agencies that might be those that identify the children first, whether it be schools or health. But again, there's processes in place for notifications to go through schools, specifically the police and other agencies when there's been a domestic abuse incident. But I certainly do think there's probably always more we can do around that support for children, and particularly with the Domestic Abuse Act, children have been identified as victims in their own rights. I think it's probably an area that we can strengthen.
I can just come back.
Yeah, sure.
Chair, thank you. Yes, I was just thinking safeguarding in schools, which we have a process where they will take a child through. Are we part of that? It's well, we're a part of the partnerships as the child goes through the bit.
We would make our own onward referrals So whether or not that we wouldn't necessarily notify the school, we might notify sort of social care or early help, and then they'd kind of have those ongoing conversations that as much as we needed to be involved in that kind of partnership wraparound service.
Councillor Boyne, then councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. I've actually got quite a few questions, so I think I need to go, or comments and questions, got to go, I need us, for me to do a few, and this
Yeah.
problem. Okay, thank you for this, just a few points of clarification, then. In terms of the consultation, one of the parts of the, I presume we'd also be putting this, to local NHS providers and South East Ambulance Service, for them to look at as well for their comments. Thanks. Thank you. Lots of heads, good, quick way to answer, Donny. On 2.4, so the numbers are, one is one too many, but 5,465 is more. But, and it's not in any way to downgrade, but is there a particular period, does it peak? I wonder if there's a peak time where we tend to see more cases of domestic abuse being reported, and if that is the case, whether we may want to put on additional resources at those almost like critical times, so then we don't become overloaded or overwhelmed by potential requests or reports of it that may actually stretch us so far that we cannot meet the needs that we are intending to. Yes. The other two, I'll stop with that one. On 2.7, says the, will be undertaken by separate domestic abuse policy procedure that will be provided for the staff. Why do we need as a, of the member of staff, so I would expect any policy to have all assets in one place. Why would we need a separate policy for this for staff? What, as opposed to why would we have a fundamental abuse policy? And then would there be an appendix so that if I'm trying to find the member of staff, I need to look at one policy for this. I'm looking here, I'm looking there, I'm looking, I don't know where it is. Would it not be better to potentially contain it within one overarching document that is a central source of truth, where everyone can actually go to for that piece of information? And then the last one at this point, on 2.8, again, I like the idea of, I think I like the idea of domestic abuse. I'm just wondering what would be put in place for those who undertake that role for their own mental well-being, because these can be incredibly emotional situations, and we don't want to put people under pressure to carry out the role and suddenly feel that they're on a desert island and no reports around them. Then my first view, I'll come back in the moment, Mr. Chair.
Doing in reverse order. A very good comment about the champions. I mean, a lot of this is, I say a lot of this, the champions idea is in its very early stages of how we're going to run it, how we're going to develop it. We're looking at, as part of the Domestic Abuse Housing Alliance accreditation, to have an internal working group of staff. We've got the first meeting of that in sort of the next 2 weeks, and HR will be represented as part of that. But I think certainly learning from other, we had mental wellbeing champions, mental health first aids, and again, I think that was one of those comments that came around in that, we've certainly got provisions in place that we can direct them to kind of that debriefing or that, you know, and should they need it, but we'll make sure that's built into that response. Again, in terms of the staff policy, very good point. We haven't yet had the conversation with HR about exactly what that document may look like. So maybe that it is best suited appendix to this, that actually somebody could find it in an easier way. In terms of the staff or accreditation, they recommended separate policies, but we don't have to do that by the book. That's just why that's kind of goes. And in terms of peaks, certainly can't talk from, I guess, presentations to the council and our safeguarding cases specifically on domestic abuse, but certainly from that's reported to Kent Police and from what service providers say, typically January was quite a busy period, and kind of nobody tends to want to upset the apple cart during the Christmas festive period. And actually, once they've been through that, I've done with five, but if there is a little bit of a peak then. We've got the World Cup coming up, which again, traditionally, these sporting events are known for being, for there being an increase in domestic abuse. There is always extra resource put on around that. But imminently coming up, we've got the national 16 days of action around domestic abuse. There's a lot of communication and promotion of support services around that. So you'll see some bits and pieces about that coming up, but that's done typically again November, December ahead of that festive period, and that being kind of January peak. So there's some evidence of peaks that we can work.
Don't need to come back to carry on with this.
Are you happy with all the answers, or do you want to come back?
I'm happy with those answers. I've got some more questions, but I'm going to test something else and I'll come back again later, or so carry on.
Carry on.
Thank you very much. In terms of the actual policy, when I read, there was a slight contradiction, and maybe it's just how I read it. Picking on what Councillor Dent said, 3.1, domestic use defines the incident or family incident of controlling those in blood. It's between those that are 16 and over, and or have an intimate relationship with family members. And then got 3.4.
Councillor Boyne, can I just interrupt? Sorry for a minute. I couldn't ask you just to come forward a bit so the sound can be picked up.
Yeah. 3.4, so the domestic Act 2021 recognises children as victims of domestic abuse. It reads as a slight contradiction between the two on that. And just coming back to 3.1, where in the eyes of the law would foster children sit? Would they be classed as family members? I accept that children who are adopted would probably, I'm not sure legally about foster children. Got those two. Then, 6.1.2 said about the policy will be reviewed on a regular basis. Come back to those who are policy we talked a couple of weeks ago, which it should be absolutely. But then it said within a minimum 3 years. I think that's the wrong word.
Yeah.
It should be a maximum of 3 years. And if you do it to a minimum, it's not going to be before 3 years. Do we need it at all, as opposed to actually coming not leave it to, as we had at Portsmouth? We'll review it on a regular basis during that period. And then I'm trying to skip any other points. Then my last one is, I think, member training. See the section about staff training. Didn't see anything about member training necessarily, and the record keeping. How long actually is the statutory retention for cases like this? Just out of curiosity.
6
Thank
years.
you.
6 years on the record retention, which is in line with our wider safeguarding practices. Having reference to member training in here only because staff training was kind of put in as a mandatory training that we're expecting staff to do. I'm conscious of the fact that wider safeguarding training, having said, is mandatory for members. I can certainly make reference to making domestic abuse training available for members if we think that's something we do. The definitions. I think there's probably some slight confusion in the wording, in the 3.1 was a nationally recognised definition of domestic abuse. I think I took from the Women's Aid website, where the addition of the children is where it is relatively new. I struggled to find a definition that made a huge amount of sense around it, but I will check the wording of that. And again, foster children, I'd like to think is included within that, and we certainly wouldn't treat anybody any differently depending on whether they're a foster child or a adopted child. But again, I'm further clarity and make that clear within.
And it should be the maximum 3 years.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
actually,
I agree with that.
do we need to remove that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
No more?
Thank you.
Brill. Okay, so if we move on, I've got Councillor Gibson, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Hampshire, then Councillor Whiting.
So, thank you, Chair, and I just want to comment if I can, page 6, for alternative options. And yes, we understand it's not a statutory responsibility, and it's good practice. I think, as an organisation, it should be the only practice for us, so that's why, I would commend this particular paper, to go forward in terms of consultation and so on. Just then briefly, drilling down further, and I know it's all wordology and known how phrasing in Suffolk and Cheshire and many other organisations, and that's in relation to part 2.8. We mentioned domestic abuse champions, and it also again further mentioned on page 12.7.6. And I just wondered whether it's domestic abuse champion, whether we're getting the right kind of wording for example across there, whether it should perhaps be domestic abuse lead will be introduced to community teams or something around that. I'm not precious about any kind of wording, I just thought I'd put it out there to see what other members felt around that wording. And whilst I accept that the national abuse champion and so on is used widely across the country, that doesn't say, need to say that it has to be a word, it just seems strange that it can be misconstrued as that we're championing domestic abuse. So I don't know what the members' thoughts are on that.
What are the, well, let's throw out the question. What are the members' thought on the word champion?
Would go anti-domestic abuse champion.
Domestic abuse support champion.
Go.
Sorry?
Yeah.
I totally see what Councillor is aiming at. For me, it's almost like the word champion is something who, it's almost promoting it.
Yes.
I don't know what the alternative is.
I know
But yeah, something other, yeah.
it's difficult, isn't it, without the industry, like say, controvert or,
Rather than-
I mean, it's, that gets a little bit too woolly for the public, I think, and I understand that, we all understand the principle the champion is somebody that will fight your corner and be, so it's just about that, perhaps it's a bit of nonsense, but it's some feedback we might get, so just.
Thing. I mean, as you said, it is a nationally recognised term.
Yes, it
Now
is
you
indeed,
said it,
yeah.
I can see, that it could be construed the wrong way. Domestic abuse support champion, if anyone else has any suggestions, shout, we'll see what we can do about it.
And I think that's probably a good way forward, rather than discussing it and spending hours. Either we look at the change or look at a different terminology, but if you do think of something, then just email Steph and say, would this sound fine?
Well, indeed, Chair, whether we just leave it, it's, I just can't put it out there for the straw poll for the fleet, so. Good.
Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, before I pick my own points up, perhaps we should just simply call it Champions Against Domestic Abuse. Yeah, better term. I've just got two things, both relating to the policy. I'm entirely happy with the paper which is attached. Domestic abuse implies abuse within a family or family environment, if you like. So the comments tend to associate with families and spouses and partners and children and so on. But my experience, so far as it is, would indicate that are you saying that domestic abuse would include abuse perhaps of people of colour, people of ethnic minority races, people within the LGBT plus community, that sort of grouping, or those sort of groupings, because they are not mentioned at all, as far as I could see in that. And my second point, may I say, not something I have any expertise in, but councillor Perkins specifically asked me to raise it. And that is something I'm sure you'll be aware of, which is trauma-informed practice, which I gather is a fairly well-established process which has developed over the last 20 years or so. And I wonder whether you feel, Charlotte, that should be included somewhere in the policy.
I'd agree on the trauma-informed practice. You know, it is quite a key phrasing at the moment around explaining the impact of things like domestic abuse on children and young people, and then their sort of behaviours as an adult. And I think that's definitely a requirement and something we can reference within policy. In terms of, I suppose, the definition of domestic abuse and then those with protected characteristics, yes, those with protected characteristics obviously can experience domestic abuse, and particularly part of this DARPA accreditation, they're very keen for us to explore our response to those groups in more detail. So we will be doing more work around that. Obviously, there is hate crime when there's incidents or issues against somebody because of a characteristic. Certainly from a domestic abuse policy, domestic abuse response, yes, those groups can be affected, but it's that familial relationship that makes it domestic abuse.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's all right. Do you want to come back on it?
No, that's fine.
So I've just got councillor Hampshire, councillor Whiting, councillor Dendor. Anybody else? Councillor Beard, and then we'll move on, shall we? I can't see anyone online who's asked to speak, so down to councillor Hampshire.
Thank you, Chair. It seems quite apt following what Councillor Henderson's just said. There's a couple of things that, I mean, this is what's been said, some of the concerns about, different views and website like you. I think that could maybe be a detriment of thinking about domestic effects. They might have different factors at play, and equally the level of reporting, because of the nature of it, might be very different as well. But I do think it's very apt to bring a policy like this forward at this time when national action is going on, and equally domestic abuse tends to incentivize that more in views of financial difficulty. And we know we're in a cost of living crisis. We know it's going to be very tough to vulnerable people. The likelihood would be that domestic abuse go on. So anything that is quite timely. But going on from what Councillor Henderson said, I just wondered why you would say this policy forward. This policy forward, like on its own, when equally the overall remit of safeguarding, which this is kind of primarily centred around, would deal with issues of hate crime, which you referred to. And I just wondered whether you've got a separate policy that specifically deals with that, and whether that can be shared with the committee, say on an annual basis, to make sure that they're happy that it's up to date. And then also, issues around sort of vulnerable children, vulnerable adults, because they will find themselves maybe caught up across all three areas, but they too have those very own specific needs and the circumstances. And I didn't know whether, again, there's a separate policy that relates to that, and equally is something that gets reviewed annually, and again, it's something that maybe this committee. So thank you very much.
So yes, in answer, there is a separate safeguarding policy and procedures that underpin it, and that's been in place for the last 7+ years. It is reviewed annually, and that's probably why we haven't had this sort of policy before. So with the community safety policy, looking at that area of business, but then the safeguarding policy, looking at all of these types of issues. There have been a response in place for domestic abuse victims. This was just considered that extra layer of good practice, I guess, in terms of kind of bringing those two different agendas together and just making sure that it's as strong a response as it can be. So certainly, there is already this response in place. We are already looking at these issues, and safeguarding policy actually is next on my list of things to do. I think it's actually scheduled to go to the House Health
yes, the safeguarding responsibilities actually fall within the remit of the Housing and Health Committee, but obviously all members will have access to the committee papers, but yeah, I think it should be for the March meeting.
That'll be the January meeting.
Paul, sorry.
One clarification, so I said that there is an overarching safeguarding policy, but this is something that is on top of or in addition to. And what I was getting at is, have you got separate ones that specifically deal with adults and children? And have you got another one that specifically deals with hate crime that picks up on the point that Councillor Henderson, I think, was alluding to about the area of discussion?
No, not at this point. The safeguarding policy is that overarching that covers all the different sections in an area where, yeah, this is the first, yes, safeguarding concern category where we've done this standalone. So,
Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. First of all, I'd just say I would commend this going out to the consultation. I think it's a very good document. So a couple of questions. The document talks a lot about our duties to support those who are victims, which is a good thing. We've also, the Care Act also puts upon us some responsibility to try to prevent this. That's quite light in this policy. We don't talk very much about what we are doing to prevent, whether there's targets with our partners to lower the numbers of incidents. There's very little on prevention here, but it does rightly focus, in my view, it still rightly focuses on supporting those who are victims. In the last bullet point in 5.1, we talk about guaranteed housing authority for all survivors. And I just wonder whether you could elaborate on what that means. Does that mean that a survivor of domestic abuse will forever have a priority on the housing list? But we see that with 5,000 cases a year, that number is going to get quite high quite quickly. So I don't quite understand the mechanics of how that particular bullet point.
Yeah, so in terms of that bullet point, so that there's an element within the Act that obviously brought that responsibility onto us, which is why we got the funding as well from the government in terms of new burdens of responsibility. So it's more linking with if someone flees domestic abuse and they've had a secure tenancy in social housing, for example, that they don't lose those rights and that we can transfer those rights. So it is at that point of, so if someone presents to us fleeing domestic abuse, then it's about us working with the relevant housing association or transferring a tenancy forward and working on those cases that we would deal with where people come into domestic abuse. So it's just providing that protection really going forward, but it's very much about those people that present to us and we deal with them in that sort of fleeing situation. The legislation is probably too new for us to have, well, it is too new to have case law, and whether there is any sort of longer term rights to that. And I think that's something that, you know, we regularly keep up to date with case law and information that comes through. And I think that's something as all councils will learn over the next few years as different scenarios present themselves. But that is the basic principle. And I think in terms of about presentations around domestic abuse cases to housing, it is about, it roughly is around about 10% a year of our caseload.
Thank you, Chair. One final point, Chairman, and just picking up on the point and Councillor Hampshire made, if I may. I mean, there are all sorts of permutations to this. I know parents are abused by their 16-year-old children. There's a whole range of this, and I'm pleased that the answers that suggest that actually all permutations within a family setting or within a household are actually covered in some way by this or this enough policy with the council. Thank you.
The prevention, and actually I think you're quite right that there is a reference within here and probably should be. I think historically, certainly when I came into role, there were domestic abuse support services for victims. That's reasonably well established now. Then we were looking more around as response to perpetrators and trying to change their behaviour. There's been probably not as much emphasis on that prevention element. And although we also support Sweden, for example, are just about to launch a campaign aimed at 16-year-olds about healthy relationships, recognising signs and symptoms that something's not right, what to do about it. So there's stuff going on that we're supporting, that maybe that is something that we can add in here that is considerational, but that we want to make sure we are doing more.
Councillor Sindel.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I just wanted to go back on 3.1. I'm not working. Yes. But it just occurred to me after listening to Councillor Bowen and Councillor Henry. We said domestic abuse, a domicile. And it suddenly occurred to me, children in our children's home. That is their domicile. Or those kind of settings where they're being looked at, not by parents, but carers in a specific different setting than a home. It's still domestic because that is their domestic reality. And I just wonder if we need to think about, does it include?
I will get some clarity there. I would suggest that, if there's any form of abuse or concern going on in that sort of setting, it would be more under the child safeguarding, child abuse angle than necessarily being classed as domestic abuse. Yeah.
I think, obviously Ofsted have responsibility. There's quite a lot of regulation around care settings for young people. I think there's a lot more legislation, quite rightly, to protect children in that settings rather than, but whether I think it's unlikely to be recorded as a domestic abuse crime. Obviously, if it was a violent act, it would be recorded as that. But I think generally it would be wrapped up in other regulation around children's homes, and
Of course, KCC are corporate parents.
they are.
So they have responsibility directly. Those homes
And
as well. It was just interesting that it is there, not saying it is there. Yeah. Thank you.
And the last person, Councillor Beer.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully support this going out to consultation. My question is rather simple and I don't need an answer this evening. But on the 5,465 incidents, I'm assuming that that figure is available for every district, and probably not the term that I want to use in this context, but there must be a league table for Kent. And I just wondered if that could be circulated in context for members.
That's no problem. I think I'm due to come back in January actually with a sort of an overview of our strategic assessment. So once a year on the community safety side, we do review figures from all sorts of different areas, domestic abuse being one of them. So actually that would be one of those comparisons that we would normally do to.
I think just for us, gives us context as well. So I mean, that's a horrific figure. And that's just Swale.
That's Ken.
Yeah, that is Kent.
It said within Swale.
Within Swale.
Within Swale for the period of September 21.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you're quite right, reported to
That's
Kent Police.
Swale.
Yes, that's even more phenomenal.
And only reported incidents.
Yeah. Yeah, well spotted.
And that in fact, it doesn't necessarily mean 5,465 individuals. That could be the same person who's been abused and reported multiple times. But it is still a frightening figure when you think that is just our district.
Okay, so if we move on, I take it everyone's happy that this goes out for consultation. I think there's been some very good input put in, but thanks for that. And thanks for such a good report. And if we can take on points, forward the points that someone's raised. Thank you. So the recommendation is that this goes out, that the community agrees that the draft domestic abuse policy goes out for public consultation for a period of 8 weeks. Is everyone quite happy?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry, need a seconder.
I'll second.
Okay. Everyone's quite happy with,
Councillor
right. Sorry, Councillor Bowen.
Absolutely no problem. I just want to go back to Councillor Peter's comment about the title. Is there any way we could include that or ask that question also to the public?
Yep.
See what they say.
Dave, yeah,
We don't know everything. And they come up with the last moment, actually, that helps it.
it doesn't matter where it comes from if we get it wrong. That's the thing. Thank you. So, If we move on now to agenda item 6, the Mayor's Civic Award, and I'm going to ask the Chief Executive, Larissa Reid, to introduce the report. Larissa.
Thank you very much, Chair. This report is quite short, and it sets out the possibility to have a Mayor's Civic Award. It sets out that we know that we have an awful lot of people in our borough that do an awful lot of good work, and often they are the unsung heroes. We used to have a volunteering award, which was quite a large awards ceremony, but due to the financial situation of the country, really, it was suggested that wasn't an appropriate way forward. And so what we've come up with is a proposal which sets out an award with one round of applications, a maximum, of 3 awards a year. That it will be advertised. Councillors and staff can nominate people but can't be nominated, nor can they be awarded to any former member of staff or former councillor for work that happened as part of their job within the council. That the judging will be taken place by a panel of judges chaired by the mayor, but with one councillor from each political group represented on the council, whatever that may be at a given time. That I will provide support to the panel and carry out any due diligence on the nominees, and that in the similar way to the Freedom Awards will be awarded at a meeting of the full council, and then but they will also be at a convenient time for them be invited to afternoon tea with the mayor. So that sets out the basis of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
I'll take Councillor Hampshire first, and then Councillor Henderson, Councillor Bowen, and Councillor Beard.
I'll move down here so you can hear me. It's not so much a question, it's more a general comment. I mean, I think it's great to recognise the unsung heroes, those that give up an awful lot of their time to help various, people in the community or do various things for their community. I just don't think they get necessarily enough recognition. But I accept the point that's been made about the lavish ceremony, and that maybe not be appropriate in this time. But there were a number of awards given, and I just wonder how you're going to knock down, say, the 12 or so that were given out then to 3, and that adequately recognises the people that give up so much of their time and do so much good. You also recommended, though, I know that the first award be given in April 23, and that we agree stepping up the Mayor's Civic Award. But it's very light on detail as to, how you would apply for it, what the criteria is that you'll be looking for, what actually constitutes the 3 awards. Is it going to be individual? Is it going to be group? Is it going to be in a particular sector? And is it going to be, age groups as well? I mean, children do an awful lot of voluntary work as much as adults. So it goes back to the point I made. You had this big lavish awards ceremony that gave out 12, 20 odd awards. I don't know how you're going to be able to get the recognition across Swale with just 3.
So the answer to that is that we're not looking at categories. We are looking to have 3 within any category. It could be a group, it could be from a young person, old person, and it's up to the judging panel to look at all of the awards and choose the best 3, all of the nominations, and choose the best 3. The reason that 3 was a number that was thought of was because there has to be something special about it. There has to be something special about receiving an award from Swale, from the mayor, to say this is something that is the greatest, one of the highest achievements. When we do the Freedom of the Borough, we don't set out, very, very clear criteria. It's somebody that has been exceptional, and if you look at the winners of that, there's such a broad variety of winners. So it is about people putting forward other people that they think have done very good, not within a category, not pigeonholing, you could end up with 3 winners that are all young people, because in that year, they're the people that really did things that were outstanding and shone.
Do you want to come back on that, Councillor Hampshire?
I wait to see the basis of the application and what the skills and qualities is that you're looking for, which this report is going for. And to be fair, to do the process by April, to get the application process set up and agreed to, and people fill in 50, I think that's very, very tight to get it before further, which is essentially the aim here. And I don't know what I'm agreeing to tonight because the details not there. I admire the concept. I think it's good. I think it's the right thing. But does it give enough recognition? And how are we going to measure people, or what is it that people need to meet to be eligible to apply? But this paper, silent on the detail. But the overarching thing, I'm pretty supportive of.
Okay, so Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, I think both the points I wanted to pick up have in reality been answered. If I'm right in what I heard, I am delighted to hear from Narissa that politicians are not eligible. I think that's a huge step forward. And I believe she also said that it can be an individual or a group or an association or something like that. If what I understand is correct, then I certainly agree with both those points. And just picking up on the previous comments, I don't see any problem in you have to get something like this going whenever you decide to get it going. We've been doing it, in fact, in Faversham for some years, and the Mayor's Awards are well known, and there's never been any difficulty in having a very restricted number, because where the number is restricted, then, as Larissa says, it has to be something pretty special, which actually provides the award. So I'm very comfortable with it, and I support that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, just a few questions and comments. My first one about it said that the general principle I like the idea of anything which we do to recognise the contributions of non-politicians to the area of society, however you want to call it, is a big plus. There are thousands of unsung heroes out there. To try and whittle down to 3 is a huge, huge undertaking. I'm not keen on the line that the awards will be awarded at a meeting of full council. I think there is a risk by doing that it will just become another agenda item, and if time is getting, or we're looking at other items later on in the meeting at full council, we're going to downplay this potentially and minimise it to rather than have the celebratory effect that it actually warrants and deserves. I actually think it would be better to have this as a separate event, possibly before a full council, but a dedicated ceremony, whatever meeting, to recognise these people who are going to be given this award, rather than an agenda item as part of another meeting. I think that sends a slightly wrong message. I think in terms of the cost, to somewhere in the region of £500, may be the case. But if you have a group of winners who are from a particular group or an organisation, and the group price all out for an afternoon tea, £500 may not actually be anywhere near enough. And also, would that cover the cost? I presume there is actually going to be a fiscal reward for them. Would that be one per person? Again, if we've got 5 or 6 or 7 or an entire organisation doing good work, that bill could suddenly rack up. I wonder, and I think we had it in the past also, whether we could look for external sponsors who may be willing to come and say, yes, we will cover the cost of this and support it. And if that is the case, then actually we can have that much bit more of a fanfare to it. In terms of the people nominated, this will have to be handled sensitively. I hope we would also be able to show not only the winners, but actually also everybody that was nominated for it. And that the sensitivity comes in actually, you were good, but you weren't quite good enough aspect. But I think there should be a means to recognise everybody who is nominated for this, regardless of whether they win or not. They all play a part in their contribution. So those are the general points. One specific point, I think Councillor Hampshire said the word as well. If we're looking to do this in April next year, how does PERDA affect that? Because we will be in PERDA period in April. And I'm not sure we, as a mayor, as a council, whether that would actually be within the rules. Thank you.
So through you, Chair, any award would be given to the organisation, not an award to each person. We could do certificates to each person, but if you look at the Queen's Award for volunteering, I've been part of an organisation that's won that, and it was the organisation that won it, and 2 representatives of that organisation went to meet the Lord Lieutenant and did that similar thing. So it wasn't everybody. The rules around the rules around pre-election period doesn't say that you can't do these things. What it says is you can't take controversial decisions. Now, the mayor is a non-political post, so for the mayor to give out an award that has been determined by a cross-party group of councillors before the pre-election period starts we would struggle to suggest that that was a controversial decision. The pre-election period is around decisions, not around awarding a certificate or an award to somebody that council believes have done a good job. So it is completely allowed within the pre-election period. The £500 was working on three winners getting something, and then an afternoon tea, which would be served in the mayor's parlour. You are correct that in the event that, for example, I won the Queen's Award for volunteering when I was working at the hospital shop at Kent and Canterbury Hospital. I didn't get to go to the event because I was just a very old Saturday girl who worked there, but some people did, and that's what we would do here. We would suggest that 3 or 4 people from the organisation, if it was an organisation, would go to the afternoon tea with the mayor. So we would have to keep it within the budget. Sponsorship is something that we could look for. However, we do need to be mindful that a lot of the volunteer, if our groups actually would rather have funding than a lavish sponsored thing. And actually, this is about council recognising the good work that's happening in our community. I think doing it at a meeting before council, which is in fact what we do with Freedom, it's not done as an agenda item at council, it's a separate meeting. I think what I was trying to get across in the report is to mirror that similar sort of event, a separate meeting where it is just about that, but it is done with the mayor in full robes, because actually for lots of people, coming to that sort of event is a once in a lifetime. You don't get to do it very often. I think sometimes we forget the impact that our pomp and circumstance of the banging of the door, the mayor coming in robed, actually is something very special to people and their elected councillors saying thank you. So I think that is, for a lot of people, much more meaningful than maybe going somewhere and having champagne and, you know, canapes and it not being that solemn ceremony.
You want to come back at all?
Thank you. Hard to hear that, Larissa, in terms of the separate, but it's not just an agenda item. You're absolutely right. The other part about the nominees, so we don't just recognise the winners.
No. So part of the thing that we want to do is a good place to put all the nominees is timing this so people can nominate. We advertise it through Inside Swale, and then the later Inside Swale has photos, and that's a really good place to put all the nominees and say thank you, because that goes to every house in the district. So we can say to every house in the borough, these were the people, thank you to all of these people. And that is a way of doing it without saying you almost won. It's saying, we're saying thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I've 3 people left to speak: Councillor Gibson, Councillor Davey, and finally Councillor Whiting. Councillor
Okay, thank you, Chair. I've been really brief because most of the things have been said and have been clarified by Larissa. But one of the key things for me is about the limitation on numbers. And I think it's like every award, if there are very few of them, the prestige becomes so much greater. I've been involved in everything from sport, music, national championships, National Fire Service Awards. And I heard what Councillor Hampshire said about, but there's lots of people out there doing lots of good stuff. In fact, there's lots of people that we won't even put forward because they don't want that recognition. They want to sit in the background and they don't want to be there. So how do we capture those people? They don't want to put themselves forward. They just want to do the things that they want to do because they like doing it. So I don't subscribe to that. I do subscribe to a limited number because, as I said, it's there in the report. The same with Freedom in the borough. If you start saying, oh, well, we'll have 3 or 4 of those, then we'll have 5 or 6, it just diminishes the credibility of that award for me. So I'll be supporting this wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Some good points well made. I do apologise. Just before I go to Councillor Davey, don't know how I did it, but I missed Councillor Beard. So I'll jump to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, I completely agree with separating this from the Freedom of the Borough. There's a reason that we've only awarded it 7 times in the history of the authority. It should be something that shouldn't just be handed out. It should be something that should be for, as the Chief Exec said, people who've given momentous service over a number of years or have done something spectacular that have benefited the borough. The Volunteer Swale Awards, again, on the costing side of things, I completely agree with now is not the time to be holding lavish dinner ceremonies, etc. However, at the same time, I always understood that it was largely cost neutral because we were getting sponsorship in for it and it wasn't costing the council and the taxpayer money. I wanted to cast our minds back, however. This item wasn't on the forward plan, it's come out of the blue. At the Cabinet Advisory Committee in October 21, the Cabinet Member for Communities, I'm not sure who that was, brought a report about the Swale Volunteer Awards. And we agreed to get rid of the lavish celebration dinner and the awards presentation. And we resolved that the nominations were going to open in June 22 and the awards event was going to be held in October 22. My question is, what has this authority done for a year? Because we agreed that a year ago, it hasn't happened, and now all of a sudden we're being asked to agree an award that's going to be given out a couple of weeks before the election. It certainly starts worrying people when you hear about that. My last word of warning is the amount of people that we did used to have get put forward for the volunteer awards. It was a struggle to narrow it down and pick the people who are going to win in the 12 categories. If you're narrowing it down to 3, that's going to be a hell of a task for the judging panel.
So this has been spoken about. You're right, it came last year to the Cabinet Advisory Committee. It isn't just about the funding to provide the award. Since that time, the team that managed it has restructured. The people that were organising that, which is quite a lot of organisation, have left the organisation. They've been their job roles have changed, and having the resources to be able to do that. You'll see in the report that this process will be supported by the Chief Executive and her PA. So, you know, and my PA, because we don't have resources elsewhere in the council to be able to provide this sort of 12 category, even if it were at a slim down award ceremony. The actual work that's involved for teams that we have who are being hugely overstretched, working with the voluntary sector, working through communities with slim down teams because of the funding situation that we are in, means that we don't have the resources to be able to do that. And if we did want to do that, then we'd have to cut resources from somewhere else. So this is a way of keeping the importance of saying thank you, of recognition, without putting a burden on officers that are already working to support the voluntary sector and already working with communities with reduced staffing. And so we get the same outcome. It's just a different way of providing it. And this report should have made comment about the report that went to the Cabinet Advisory Committee, because it certainly has been discussed when I was writing this report. It certainly has been discussed, but we just don't have the resource in the organisation to be able to do that. And I mean, it's in Charlotte's team, so possibly I wondered if, Charlotte, you had anything to add to that.
No, I don't think I have anything to add. I think, as Larissa has said, we used to run the 12 volunteer awards. We had additional resource in. Sponsorship did decline over the last few years, so it wasn't cost neutral to the council anymore. And I think we definitely want to recognise the voluntary community sector. They do a fantastic job, and there's a lot of people that put an awful lot of hours to help a huge range of our residents in the borough. So I think this is a proposal that provides that, but doesn't put a burden on our teams to deliver, and a resource issue to the council.
But of course, I think you're quite right, Councillor Beer. There was the advisory group, and the term advisory is that, and yes, it would have been hoped to run one as stated. However, people were leaving the team, moving on to other jobs, and people were being recruited. So it seemed impractical to do, and the money that it cost would probably be better supporting people in the community who are helping some of the most vulnerable. So I made the decision at the time to pull it and to move it, postpone it. This seems to be an ideal opportunity, and I think I can understand your worries on the political side, because it is April and there are elections coming up. But I think that the safety net there is it's a cross-party panel who will make the decisions. But I appreciate your reservations, but there will be oversight to it, I'm sure, by the Chief Executive to make sure that that doesn't occur. I don't know if you want to come back on anything.
The only comment I would respond, Chairman, is if this has been discussed and the decision was made not to progress, why wasn't it reported back?
Yes, that's a fair comment, and it should have been. Thank you.
Because like I say, it
Yes.
wasn't on the forward plan, so
No.
this has kind of dropped out of nowhere.
Yes, yeah, yes. No, it's not. It's been looked at to try and keep it going, but yes, it should be on the forward plan, and I can only apologise for that. So we will make and do better next time. Thank you. Right. Councillor, good, no, you've been on Councillor David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the answer is, I've heard the answer. It was just about the practicality of the actual award. I take it we're looking, rather than a cash award, it's a physical award of some sort, nicely engraved and presented, and certificates to the rest of the organisation. That was my question. I'm feeling there is a nod inside. Thank you. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
And the last one, Councillor Whiting.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. This is a bit of a sad day for me because I invented and devised and introduced the 12 volunteer awards. And we won them very successfully as a sponsored event with very little. Sophia ran, I paid tribute to her. And Sophia and myself used to run it between us, and it got, you know, extra bit of support here and there. It was enormously well received by the voluntary sector. And what I liked about it was the range of people. I think we started with 6 categories and an afternoon tea, and it grew to an evening event with 12 categories. But that was just because of the level of the number of entries we had and the amount of work going on. And it was never any difficulty in filling those, the winners and the highly commended each year with a different set of people, because Swain is full of people doing good stuff all of the time. So it's kind of sad that we've got to some pass now where we're retracting to a much smaller event, recognising far fewer people. I understand what Councillor Gibson says about sort of the scarcity that makes them more valuable, but also it does leave out an awful lot of people. So if we are going to go down this route, we are going to end up with three awards. I would like to see a goodly number of highly commendeds in there somewhere, and whether we say that's going to be another 3 or whether it's going to be 6, or it's going to be 10, I don't know. I'll leave that to somebody else, and depending, I guess, on the kind of entries you get. But I do think it's worth, you know, if we can recognise 12 good organisations and good people in these awards, and 3 getting the big dogs and the others getting the highly commended, I think that would be something well worth doing. With regard to the presentation, I would just suggest that I have no objection to it being at a council meeting or a pre-council meeting, but I would suggest we do it at the mayor making. I see no reason at all during the course of the mayor making evening that we can't fit in a presentation to 3 people and do it then. And the outgoing mayor perhaps would be the last action for the outgoing mayor is to present that year's awards. But I think that directed really through you, Chair, and Whistle, I think that would solve any likely fallout, political fallout, of having it in the middle of Perth, which I think would be a wrong thing to do. But if we're going to have it, and I agree with you, Lewis, entirely through you, Chair, the pomp and circumstance is something that people, as you say, perhaps only get to see once in their lifetime if they're a recipient, and it's really important. And the mayor making ceremony is the pinnacle of that pomp and circumstance. And I think it would be more fitting to have it as the last act of an outgoing mayor than do it during a normal council meeting in the middle of February. I'll leave it there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whiting. I think we'll move to the vote now, and I think we'll take both items separately if that's all right, because I can appreciate that in item 2, some people might have some reservations on that one, and to mix them 2 up wouldn't seem appropriate in my view. So on item 1, and I would propose the recommendation 1, sorry, that the community committee agree to the setting up of the Mayor's Civic Award. So can we have a vote on that? Is there a seconder? Councillor Henderson. All in favour? Now, I thought Councillor Whiting was substituting for Councillor Hampshire.
No, I'm substituting Councillor.
No, you were, but I'm sure Chair. Oh,
I was on the first one.
Sorry, who are you substituting for?
Councillor Hampshire.
So originally, that was the case, but seconds afterwards, councillor Hampshire walked in, so then I didn't know whether you were going to be substituted for councillor Neil, who can't actually vote.
We've got 5 seconds.
I think. Today.
You can take my vote if you want.
This is not behind up anyway. I didn't look ahead of anyway.
Right, no, it's all right. So you get a count on that. so-
Everybody voted in favour.
Okay, fine.
Some people twice.
On the second recommendation, I propose a recommendation that the first award be given in April 2023.
Can I propose that?
Councillor Elliott,
So I want to,
sorry,
Can I propose an amendment to that proposal?
well, once it's been proposed, can you propose it?
It hasn't been seconded, then.
Okay, done then.
Well, my proposal would be that the first award be given at the then maybe ceremony.
I'll second that.
Okay. So,
We can go straight to the vote.
should we just go straight to the vote on that? That the award be given at the mayor making ceremony wherever, well, I think that's elected. Yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, depending,
I can find the update.
well. Is that, are you seconding? No. Yeah, sorry.
The proposal would be that the first award be given at the mayor making ceremony in 2023 by the outgoing mayor.
Okay,
Yeah, I appreciate that has been proposed and seconded, but can I nevertheless say, I think that's, pinning the chief executive down to having to do it in a certain way. Would it not be better if we simply amended it to say the first award be made in April 2023?
well, I think it's an
And
amendment, so
leave-
we've got to deal with the amendment first, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is if we say that the award is made in April 2023, that leaves some flexibility for the chief executive to work out how it can best be presented, rather than insisting that it is presented at mayor making. I think we're trying to tie it down too tightly.
So we need to take a vote on what councillor Hampshire has recommended first of all, yeah? So, who's in favour of councillor Hampshire's recommendation? So all those against councillor Hampshire's recommendation? Okay. Carried. Any abstentions? Okay. So that's the recommendation then from this committee.
Sorry, was that pass or fail?
No, it passed. So the recommend, as the recommendation as stated by councillor Hampshire, that it be, that the award be awarded at the mayor making.
You didn't give us the result of the vote, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, sorry.
So it's, 7 in favour, 5 against and 1 abstention.
Right, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And we move on now to the forward decision plan. And you're right, maybe there should be things on that forward decision plan that isn't. One of the things that's been highlighted by others, and I'm raising it and we'll get it on there, is the coach parking. That was delayed from the previous meeting and it should be on the forward plan. So hopefully we'll get that on there and we can move that forward. And I think the other good thing that really hit me tonight was the Community Safety Partnership certainly used to give a briefing, a yearly update on what they were doing, and when people are asking about what policies they've got on safeguarding abuse, domestic abuse, hate crimes and all that, And again, maybe it's a good time on the forward plan to have that presentation brought back in and put towards the community, towards the community committee. So there are two items there I'd like to see. Anybody else got anything for the forward plan or anything they want to bring up? Councillor Dendall.
Thank you, Chairman. No, simply to say, I looked at the minutes for the last meeting and there were a couple of items there that were not followed up. We brought up one. And we have the result of the cost of living review, which is agreed we should get for this meeting. Is there anything on cost of living that should be on the floor? Bring to the floor.
There may be an update that we might have to have, but we can look at that in the table update in a minute.
Well, can I propose that we put out an item of the cost of living update on?
I don't object to that, and I'll second that proposal. Is everyone quite happy with that?
Yeah. Are we not meant to, is commission up for decisions, like updates and not decisions?
Yeah,
What about decisions?
we can have things on the, if you're happy to have that on the forward plan, we can ask for something to come forward on the cost of living crisis and update members as it goes on. Hold on. Yep.
Are we not to discuss this update on cost of living?
Yep.
At this meeting?
We can look at it. It's going to be tabled in a minute. We're just looking at the item 7, the forward plan.
Well, it doesn't say it's tabled as a minute. It says it's tabled with the members update.
And that'll be after item 7, the forward plan.
Chair, if I could just intercede there, if I may,
Oh, no.
just quickly.
Are you all right with that, Councillor Henderson?
It's on the forward plan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Quickly.
but it's here, and therefore I assume it was here in order that we could receive it. And normally,
Yes, it will be in a minute.
when we receive something, we have the opportunity to discuss it.
That'll be in a minute after the forward plan.
All right, okay.
Councillor Dendall.
Yes, sorry, it was a clarification from what Councillor Henderson said. I think we've had this discussion a few times in this committee and other committees actually. It says forward decisions plan. We have several times said that as a committee, we have a right to updates. So I would suggest that this is not a forward decisions plan, it's a forward plan.
Yeah.
That we receive updates as well as make decisions. I think that's where the confusion arises on this. This has come up several times.
I agree. I think what you want to look at is like a part A and a part B. Part A
Yeah.
decisions, part B updates.
Yeah, but it's not just decisions, that's my point. We have agreed that.
So I think it's, obviously the service committees have been put in place and primarily are a decision-making forum to be able to do that. But clearly there are some strategic issues that the committee needs to be aware of and to discuss. I think we just need to be mindful that it's appropriate for the committee, and obviously the chair needs to decide what goes on there. And I think we just need to be cautious about update items for update's sake, because obviously to prepare an update does take officer resource forward, and we just need to be mindful of what issues we are bringing forward. So I think they just need to be strategic in nature and help inform the committee. So I think as long as they meet that criteria, and similar to the overview and scrutiny functions, which is why the community safety update coming forward, because there are overview and scrutiny powers that sit with this committee as well, and particularly on that item. So I think it's just, if we could just be mindful of what comes forward and the amount of resource that goes into preparing that and the purpose why it's being brought forward. And as long as it falls within those parameters and the chair agrees for it to be on the agenda, then I think that's all we ask for really, rather than a lot of updates.
Action. I completely understand what you're saying about being strategic, absolutely. But when these committees were made up, we changed the cabinet system. The purpose of the committees were made absolutely clear. They have a reporting function and they also have a scrutiny. So we have the right to ask for certain figures, certain reports to come through to fulfil both those functions as well as the decisions function of these committees. We have three functions. But I do totally understand that we mustn't overload completely, and keep it.
Thank you, and that point's well made, thank you. Councillor Hampton.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Forgive me, I think what we're discussing at the moment is thinking of the sort of the future things that can come to this committee, and whether we agree with them or whether there's something we might wish to add for consideration at some point in the future. I think in light of the discussion this evening, maybe at some point, maybe not this municipal year because of the timing involved, maybe next municipal year, but having another separate sort of policy like you've done for the domestic violence tonight, dealing with some of the issues that have been of concerns to various councils over hate crime, which, you know, hate is on the increase given what's happened at Dover and the fallout at Manston. But equally, the council has these community grant funds, and I don't know whether actually this committee should think whether the community grant funding that the council offers is appropriate, or whether there needs to be additional categories. Next year, we have the coronation of Charles III, and the council did a Jubilee grant funding last time, but that would have been afforded to the cabinet member. We don't now have a cabinet system. So maybe we need to think about, you know, should we have those sort of grants in place? Do the grants that we have satisfactorily deal with everything that we're wanting to achieve? And maybe some sort of discussion could be held.
If I come in to start with, so I think to start with, we need to establish whether the budget exists, and obviously that's a policy and resource decision, and obviously the full council process around what the future budget looks like. If within the budget there is an allocation for community grants, then obviously that is an appropriate discussion to have around the use and spend direction of that pot of funding, and if that is the right criteria now or not. But I'd say without the budget process being completed and understanding what that budget looks like, we would need to understand that first.
So just to have on record then, member grant funding and the various community grants, Christmas night grants, school facility grants that this council has been able to provide to numerous organisations for the good of their communities is under threat, and that cannot be confirmed as being at the same level of support, most likely to be less.
That is not what I said. I said the budget is a responsibility of Policy and Resource Committee, and we would need to see the outcome of the budget before making directions on how we would spend that budget.
But
As we
they
would.
are being considered as a potential area. They're not safe ring fence, shall we say.
I don't think
I can comment on the
I
budget.
don't think it's fair to ring fence anything until the policy and resources and the budget is looked at. And it's as simple as that. Where we are next year may be totally different. There's a cost of living crisis. So where we might have given grants in one area, and it probably brings us on, I'll come to you in a minute, but the whole structure is changing. I think you're going to find that the budgets that we get from central government will cripple councils, or the lack of a budget from a central government may well cripple councils. And we have people who probably, for the first time, are worried on how they're going to heat their homes. And these are people who've never experienced that. And there are even people in harder situations. And the council and the community side may have to look how we support them more, which I think comes on to the next paper in a minute. Last point from the council. Go on, come back.
So yeah, I mean, I agree, it's an uncertain playing field and all of that. What I will say, when austerity was last adopted, the voluntary sector, the big society, played a much bigger role. And these grants that are available for release do help with that. So I'd set the financial situation may be different and difficult, but actually the cost benefit should actually be quite great where some of these grants go. But we maybe need to have an assessment as to whether how they're set up at the moment is appropriate, and maybe they need to be immediately changed. And I think that goes on the point of Councillor Dendell and having some sort of update on the cost of living. And I think it would be good if this committee could have an understanding as to kind of how things are playing out in the community at the moment, what support or opportunities there are that the council has to, you know, provide additional resources, etc. And whether we feel that it's been touched in the right way, whether we feel that the council's prioritised the right things. And I think, you know, that would make a welcome discussion, I think.
Okay, the last person on this one will be councillor Bowen, then we'll move on to the cost of living, the tabled update, if that's all right.
Thank you, Chair. I can't see, that's not what the risk has said in the extreme, but coming back, it's saying, put it, policy resources a few weeks ago, and hasn't been. I think what Councillor Hampshire has said it's a good lead, and what point we're trying to make is, in terms of the budget setting for next year, if there's a committee that wanted to undertake a particular thing, like celebrating the coronation or a grant, we don't have that contribution as a committee from here to say, we would like to do this next year, which is the point I've been making for weeks on how we feed through committees into the council budget for next year. And I appreciate it is an administration's budget, but if we wanted as a committee to put money towards a coronation event or a form of working group, something like that, we're now hands tied because we're not having that conversation in the committees. And that, I think that's something we're falling down on that.
I think you're right, and I think, you know, but don't forget, if we want to undertake scrutiny, we can always ask for something to be brought forward within our remit. But I think you've made a good point. But if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to the final item, which is the tabled update, and I'd like to ask Charlotte Hudson. All right.
That's in relation to scrutiny.
Right, if members wish to undertake scrutiny of a particular issue, a report can be written to agree the scope of the scrutiny, and officers then can provide information for the scrutiny at a later meeting to enable the scrutiny to happen.
I'm sorry, Chair, way too many times I've used the word scrutiny. Apologies. Basically, if members of the committee want a scrutiny, if the chair agrees or if the committee agree, then we will bring a report setting out the scope of the scrutiny, and if you want anybody to be involved in that scrutiny, and then it will come as an agended item. There's nothing to stop scrutiny happening at any of these committees. Members just need to say what areas they want scrutinised. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do you mind if we move on to the cost of living crisis?
Well, that's what I thought we were talking about.
Well, that's what I think the two were getting. That's why I wanted to make sure
I don't want to
we close
scrutinise.
agenda 7.
I don't want to scrutinise what's been done on this cost of living and the grants available and where they're going and so on. I simply want to understand where we are on it.
So if I get Charlotte to introduce it, and then we might have a better understanding of where we are.
Yeah. So at the last committee, there was a request for an update on what we are currently doing on the cost of living crisis. And this paper is aimed to set out some of the key areas that we've been working on. The principal area that we've been working on, and just completed the second round. The first round was run completely in-house with officers directly supporting applications from members of the public. That was hugely resource intensive and not always something naturally residents would come to the council for. So on the second round, we felt that working with some key voluntary sector partners that could work efficiently and effectively together and put schemes together at speed, we have done that. So as you can see on the results just on the second page there, 7,797 households were supported in the last round. That round was predominantly because of the criteria focused on pensioners and households with children effectively, so family households and pensioner households. So it's quite tight criteria around what we had to spend it on and how we could target through direct support in terms of food and fuel and that type of work. We've just days ago had confirmation of our next tranche of funding that begins from October through to March next year. And the criteria, even though it is fairly tight still, is a little bit looser on household composition because KCC are meeting that criteria from their larger allocation across the county. Work has been done with a range of groups to prepare for that and how we go forward. And as you will see in the next few paragraphs, we have an internal cost of living group between our council departments to make sure that we've got joined up support and are identifying people in need and making sure that they are referred appropriately and making sure we're all aware of offers that are available to signpost people to. And more importantly, an external partners group, which is a voluntary sector network that's being established and is really great gaining momentum, and that is open to any voluntary sector group to be part of that network. The sort of, not an inaugural meeting because we've had other meetings, but a more established meeting is happening this Thursday. And we are looking for a voluntary sector organisation to take on the chairing of that, but be supported by the council. Because as we've had many conversations this evening, the voluntary sector can absolutely make a significant impact, and also get to various groups and individuals that maybe some statutory agencies can't. As part of that, also the community fund, community grants pot is being allocated to that group to focus on the cost of living prices and to provide things such as warm space projects or supporting people to warm their homes and reduce their school uniform issues. So lots of those individual issues that can just help alleviate some of the poverty people are in and some of the issues that people are having. And that would be for the voluntary sector to direct and work collaboratively together rather than being competition. And I think what we have found with some of the processes that we've gone through is that organisations compete, and that can be quite confusing for some members of the public. So the idea of the network is that it's collaboration rather than competition, and people working and the organisations working in partnership together. The last bit of the paper is something where we're looking to work with the voluntary sector to strengthen it, and we are using sort of cost of living partnership work as a springboard from that. Really is within the UK Shared Prosperity Fund allocation within the Communities in Place investment priority. We put in it falls within sort of the Regeneration and Property Committee, but within that wider UK Shared Prosperity Fund. That has been put into government to get approval, but there is an element of there around voluntary and community sector capacity building, and we are looking to how we can strengthen the sector. And again, led by them, we will be working closely with them about what they need, what skills they need, do they need support getting external investment in, bid writers, is there some governance support that they need? So about how they run as organisations, but how they can work more effectively together, and so we can avoid duplication of the running cost, and channel more of the funding towards the end user and our residents going forward. So that is probably a very brief summary of what has been done to date. It is a fast moving area of work, so things are changing by the week as new things are announced, schemes are announced, and access for the voluntary and community sector groups to different pots of funding and schemes going forward.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate Councillor Henderson first, followed by Councillor Whiting.
Yeah, if I may, I've really just got perhaps two questions or comments. The first is, in the last 6 months, this council has got shade under £500,000 from central government to help cost of living crisis. I think most people in this room would accept that the cost of living crisis has got worse rather than better during that period. The last 6 months might be mostly blamed on Vladimir Putin, and the next 6 months might be mostly blamed on combination of Vladimir Putin and Liz Truss, but we are only being awarded half of that amount for the next 6 months, and I just wonder whether we have any background as to why that is. The other thing is that I know there are an awful lot of agendas and minutes and emails and bits of information, but I certainly am not aware of having seen the detail of these grants being available. And I wonder whether they have been informed to all councillors, and if so, when, so I can go back and make sure I don't miss them in future.
So in terms of the allocation, so KCC have received obviously the county allocation, and they've worked out what support they are going to provide. So there is more support available for Swale residents, but some of that is delivered from the county perspective rather than provided to districts. And, you know, on services that they're best placed to run. So obviously with social care support and families that they would support, typically with adult social care, you know, with pensioner elements. So this is about a localised offer for us, and I appreciate, you know, if we had trebled the allocation, we could probably absolutely help more people and target more people. And I think that's just, we need to make sure that we're helping the right people and the people that we really need support with that allocation. And I think the opportunity to try and access more funding and advice and support for our residents is also important. In terms of the schemes, the previous scheme, the 8th September scheme, I believe did go out with the members' weekly email, so that should have been that should have gone out. And there was also press announcements with it, which I believe all members received copies of for any press releases. We are in the process of working out the allocation for and the signposting routes for the current allocation. So once that has been agreed, that will obviously go out to all members in your Friday regular email that you receive going forward.
Councillor Whiting.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a quick, I think congratulations to the officers. Not often you get given £3.25 million to spend, and you spent it very quickly. I think that's the credit to you and the organisation. It does refer in here to a £30,000 fund, which we managed to a democratic process. I do notice actually there is no members involved in any of this decision-making. There's an officer group and there's an external group which is open to all sorts of members, except members. And I wonder where the decision came that perhaps members oughtn't to be involved in developing which projects and what the priorities are. I know the government will set high-level priorities, but within that, the council has a lot of flexibility. And my question really is where has been the member involvement in setting the priorities within the flexible element of the...
I think there hasn't been. I think the urgent nature of getting the funding out, when we've got the allocation notice at short timescales. My view is, and I'm happy to be challenged on that it is an operational decision. We've received the grant funding with criteria, and we operationally need to make sure we spend that within those parameters. So it felt very much like a operational decision. There isn't a lot of flexibility in what we spend it on. You know, it has to be on food and fuel and other support going forward. So I think the immediacy of making sure it reaches our residents as quickly as possible, and the fact that it's tight criteria, I do feel it sits firmly within the operational remit of officers.
Thanks, Sharon. Thanks.
And I echo the comments. I think sometimes when things happen, when it was the cabinet system, you could go to someone and say, sign this off. But we've delegated that to officers. When we move to the committee system, and sometimes when something like this, because of the quick nature of it, you have to hit the ground running. But that's part of the scrutiny of this committee to then have a look at this and say, yes, we support it. But thank you for your point, well made. Councillor Dendor, then Councillor Hampshire.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, your last comment I totally agree with. It is operational, I think. And it's nice to see the report come through. It's good timing of this. It's great to have a report in, even though the operational side is. It makes us feel more confident. I just want to pick up on the Shared Prosperity Fund, and I want to link to something Councillor Hampshire said earlier. Because there's a contradiction here. Here we have a Shared Prosperity Fund, and you're going to work with the community involvement sector, and my whole thing of this is enlivening community voluntary sector to help you. As Councillor Hampshire said earlier, that's where your help is. And I'm not going to labour the point, but therefore restricting grants to the very sector that's going to give you a massive amount of help is going to be extremely short-sighted. Totally agree with you. And this just hammers that point in. I have a couple of questions on it though. It says to build capacity and resilience of the local BTS. And then down here to run a series of workshops and information gathering with BCS. But who are the BCS? Which organisations? I mean, there's a whole raft of them in the area. So how do you choose which are going to be involved?
Well, in a way, it's very much self-selecting. So when we were putting together the proposals to go into the UK Share Prosperity Fund application process that needs to be signed off, we've worked with a few, what I would call the more strategic players in the borough, so the bigger organisations that are very proactive, and they've come together. But it was a little bit self-selected in terms of a core group, but they will work and represent a lot of people. So we have made sure that there's representation across the borough. There, you know, for example, the Umbrella Centre in Faversham are the representative because they also run the Faversham Voluntary Sector Network there. So again, they felt like the right person and they put themselves forward for it. The actual wider network is open to everybody, but it does tend to be the larger organisations because they've obviously got the capacity and the experience of working on more strategic projects, and that's absolutely what we need. And they've actually come together and identified what issues they share as well. So we aren't limiting it, we're not prescribing how the voluntary community sector work. We are there to facilitate and support them. We want them to lead it. And we do have someone that's come forward and is prepared to chair that strategic group going forward. I won't name them because that would really put them in that, but you know, you know, they need to be elected as part of that. So this is about us co-producing and working with the voluntary sector, not prescribing.
Back to what concerns me a little is I know of a lot of smaller groups who do an excellent job. You're quite right and understand what you're saying about them not having the resource and to get too involved. But I'd like to see them drawn in because they have a lot to offer of what they do. And I think isolating them is not going to help us at all. They can bring all sorts of referrals, all sorts of pathways. So I'd like to think they're going to be involved somewhere.
They absolutely will be. As I said, we need a strategic group of partners to drive it forward. We don't want to prescribe what that looks like for them. They know how voluntary sector, community sector works. They know where the small groups are. They are linked in. And I think it is about them representing each other and being advocates for each other. Because as I say, we do seem to have a bit of competition in some areas of the sector. And we want people to be able to work together and refer to each other and saying, I've got this issue, but actually your organisation is better to support this individual and transfer them over. That's where we want to get to have a vibrant voluntary. We've got a fantastic voluntary community sector who have got us through COVID and has supported us and supported through the cost of living. You know, but there needs to be that re-energisation and bringing people together and dealing with some of their common issues together rather than them all trying to tackle those issues separately. And we're just providing that vehicle to provide that support for them.
Definitely. I just a last comment. I noticed the name and I checked it through of the organisation you're working through, Smarter Digital Services. You'd expect me to.
Okay, thank you for that. We move on to Councillor Hampshire.
Yeah, so I wanted to come here then. Look, I don't envy the decision that we had to make very, very quickly, and I don't envy the scale of the challenge. But if we're led to believe what we're about to face, it's going to be a hell of a lot worse. And it's not just going to be putting food on a table or heating a home. It's even going to be trying to get to work. And when people then actually can't afford to get to work, their situation will become even worse. And actually, you'll start finding yourself probably not just dealing with the normal sectors that you're used to dealing with, but it actually expanding much wider up that income scale to what you're used to. And unfortunately, the Chancellor is going to do the tax changes that he's going to do, that will lead to job losses with people on quite reasonable salaries. I just wonder whether the focus of, you know, business as usual, this is what we did last time, that's what we received as being the vulnerable households, whether that is actually going to capture the vulnerable households, because I think that group's going to be much wider. And there doesn't seem to be any mention here in terms of, you know, additional help with, you know, allowing people to put some petrol in the car to be able to go and purchase food or to be able to go to work. Because if people then fall out of that, then there's going to be even greater demand on government resources to see them through. So I think we don't know what's going to happen nationally. We don't know what support is going to come from the government nationally. We don't even know what the fuel support is going to be come April. But there is going to be a cut-off somewhere. And those people that just are outside, they are not going to be wealthy, I don't think. And then they're going to need to have support from these kind of things, which they wouldn't necessarily have looked towards. But at the moment, I don't think it's being expanded wide enough out to capture all the people that may fall in there. Now, I could be wrong, but that's the only comment I'm going to make. But I don't envy the task and the challenge that you've had to face, the challenge that you're going to have to face going forward. I think it's going to be pretty grim. But well done for what you have done.
I would say is even in the two previous rounds, we have seen, you know, the client group is different to what we have people who typically access some of these services. I think, you know, the barriers for people to go into food banks and things like that is very challenging for people, and people have done that. And we've had a lot of feedback from our voluntary sector organisations and some of the like the church groups and things like that, that they are seeing a different type of client group. So that is absolutely being shown, and you know, we've seen it nationally with, you know, sort of food banks set up within NHS premises and things like that. So I think everyone's aware of the pressure on a wider group, and it is about trying to make sure that support is accessible. I know some of the food banks are opening in the evenings and weekends when typically they didn't, because again, working households are needing to access their support. So I'm confident that we need to advertise the offer so people know it's there. I think there's an additional barrier around people, you know, people's pride, quite rightly, that, you know, of overcoming that and accessing the support. So I think there's another piece of work there. The work that we have a workshop on Thursday with voluntary community sector, and part of that is going to be look at what are the challenges, you know, for people to access the service. What other things, are there any groups that we're not capturing that we need to, and those types of things. So, and again, I think if we, you know, as local councillors, you may very well be contacted by people that are struggling and not know where to go. So those referral routes in, so once they're established, will be advertised to you, and you'll be able to refer people and advise people of where to go for that help. There are obviously some universal offers, and if people are accessing benefits for the first time, that there may be certain things that they may be able to. And DWP's partnership manager does sit on our cost of living group, so we are linking with the benefit system as well. But again, some people aren't used to claiming benefit for the first time, so again, it's a new experience that they need to go through, and also understand what they're entitled to and how to get that support. But it is a journey that everyone needs to go on to, and I think the sector working with us and some of the other statutory partners are very committed to supporting where we can on that journey. But we are obviously limited to the funds that have been provided to us, and within the set criteria that has been provided to us. So sometimes there feels like an obvious solution to help someone, and it you know, how can we do that, or can we refer to someone else and give support in a different way?
I think you made some very good points there, and I think it ties in with what Councillor Dender was saying. But I think as members, we all know people in our community who are going out and helping in the community. And we've all got members' grant that we can target towards them. But I think the key thing is, as you were saying, Councillor Dender, there's a lot of small group who deal with people who just are missing the system. They can't get into a food bank because they can't even afford the bus fare. Them sort of things. And it's the local people and the local groups who quite often are their lifeline. So we can support them with members' grants, providing they've got an individual bank account and a setup like that. But we can also direct them towards the partnership here to try and feed into the system so that the support might trickle down to them. So we need to pass the information forwards to our team as well. But it's a good point, well made, thank you. I've got 3 people, then I think I'll call it quits after that, if that's all right. I've got Councillor Bowen, Councillor Beer and Councillor Rolls. So, Councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Chair. Agree with you, a few months ago, I had a resident come up to me, after that. It was a Sunday. They had a young child, wanted to have nothing. Their fridge just broke down and no one to, everything they had had gone in terms of food. And the closest food bank they could get to on that, at that particular time, so I'm glad it's changed now, was in Rochester. They were a tenant. And they had no money because they didn't have their allowance or the benefits until the next day. So, didn't eat. I agree with Councillor Hampshire, right, the things are only going to get worse in terms of costs. Note a gradual, starting to see another gradual increase over the last week, so petrol prices are starting to go back up again. Little bits, there's almost on a different day to the before. My question is, and I apologise if I completely missed this, you've already covered it. In terms of the 2 priorities, the allocation A and allocation B, were they stipulated by KCC?
No, the government criteria.
So the government criteria said it has to be 75% give or take to pensioners and only 25% to families.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Beer.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I congratulate officers on this as well for getting it and doing the turnaround, and it's a big task to get it turned around and get it done and be happy with what you've achieved with making sure that you cover as many bases as possible. I wanted to pick up on the comment that you made, Councillor Dendell made in Charlotte's response about big organisations, small organisations. The one concern I have, and it's regarding big organisations, little organisations and referrals. Government gives us the money, we give the money to a big organisation. If a resident turns up at the door of that big organisation and they refer them to a smaller organisation who haven't been given funding, what checks and balances?
So I think, you know, it's one of those issues with all funding about the accountability of it and tracking the outcomes and not putting too much of a burden on the auditing, so the money actually goes to the end product. I know that there has been concerns around, you know, that model, like people just refer on and take that and claim that as an outcome without actually delivering the service. With this, the way what we put in place with this is actually, no, you have to deliver that service. So if you've referred on to someone, you can't count a referral, you count the delivery of an energy voucher or the delivery of a food parcel. That's the outcome. One of the things, and this hasn't been confirmed, is that with one of the larger food banks who absolutely get quite a lot of food in and can create food parcels, that they might be able to distribute them to the smaller ones. So rather than trying to trace more money back, actually we can deliver, you know, extra food packages to some of the smaller providers that way and achieve that economies of scale from, you know, where they get a lot of donated food and things like that. So, and that's kind of the point of the network really, is how can we most efficiently make sure that the product that the residents need is in the right place for them to get, at the minimum overhead costs, in terms of administering it, so we get maximum benefit for the residents.
This is completely anecdotal, but I had a resident contact me who went to one of the larger food banks, and the response was, well, there's a food bank in Queenborough, why don't you go there first? Well, Queenborough Food Bank doesn't get funding. So that if an organisation that's getting funded is referring people to someone who's having to rely on private funding, it seems a bit backward to me.
I think, you know, if we get individual circumstances where we've got concern, there are things that we can absolutely take up. I think we would encourage, with this funding, a lot of food banks have to raise their own funds, and the donations have dropped because obviously people that would typically donate in the supermarkets, most supermarkets have a trolley for food banks and things like that. A lot of people are reliant on those donations. Those donations have significantly dropped. So I think there's an element of, do you meet the household support fund criteria? And absolutely we have allocations for those, but you'd have had to be in a family or you'd have had to be in a pension age to meet that criteria, because we've had to pass those requirements on to people that we've grant funded. But a lot of donations have shrunk, so it might have been the pressure that they were under and encouraging people to maybe try their own local one first, because you assume that local food donations and financial donations people generally want into that very localised community. But again, we want to encourage that wider network for everyone to support everybody. We also have to be mindful of some people going around to lots of different food banks and the support needing to be there. You know, it's a scarce resource. We need to make sure we help as many people.
That was my other concern, because GDPR, the food banks can't share information on clients. So if someone goes and signs up to one and then goes and signs up to another, and I know that people have gone to a house to deliver a food parcel, and when the door is open, there's a food parcel already there.
And I think that's a sign of sometimes desperation.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you've got to feed your family, absolutely, why wouldn't you do that? But we also need to be trying mindful, and that might be very much why have you tried your local one as an engagement tool for those checks and balances as well. So it's a really tricky issue. We would, you know, to have to safeguard food in that way isn't really a situation anyone would want to find themselves in.
Cool, thank you. Last one for the evening, Councillor Roll.
Thank you, Chair. I've been listening to everybody what this cost heavy. I don't think I think we're very lucky at the moment. We've got heat. We've got a very warm autumn coming in. What's round the corner we've got to be ready for. I'm worried that East Street has been shut again for a long time. It's going to open right on the edge of Christmas. January is going to come in, and a lot of people, we know what January is like. People are slow to get on the move again after Christmas. I hope we are ready. We were very good with COVID, but our officers stepped into it and had total control. And I must praise everyone in that. I hope we are going to be ready, because if you look at the state the government is in at the moment, you know, we could find ourselves short of money when our residents really need it. And I hope that we are. I appreciate what Charles has said. I think everybody has got their eye on the ball. I do think we as councillors are to be prepared.
And I think you're right. I think the team did a very good job during COVID. I think the community, I think someone said it was people out in the community going out, checking on their neighbours, checking on people in their street. That really probably got them through it.
Homelessness on our streets.
Oh,
going up.
it is, it will.
The drunkenness, you know, a lot of that comes from people out there are desperate.
It's a shame they can't take over some hotels and make them and put them in a nice warm environment. Anything you want to come back on that, or I think you've covered it all.
I think we'll have to.
So, thank you very much. I don't see anyone online wants to say anything. I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much. And it was a very informative evening, and there were some very good points made that I'm sure the team will take away. Thank you.
Yeah, good night.